To you, Isam.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا فتحنا لك فتحا مبينا ليغفر لك الله ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر ويتم نعمته عليك ويهديك صراطا مستقيما وينصرك الله نصرا عزيزا هو الذي أنزل السكينة في قلوب المؤمنين ليزدادوا إيمانا مع إيمانهم ولله جنود السماوات والأرض وكان الله عليما حكيما ليدخل المؤمنين والمؤمنات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها ويكفر عنهم سيئاتهم وكان ذلك عند الله فوزا عظيما صدق الله العظيم. Indeed, we have granted you a clear triumph, O Prophet, so that Allah may forgive you for your past and future shortcomings, perfect His favor upon you and guide you along the straight path, and so that Allah will help you tremendously. He is the one who sent down serenity upon the hearts of the believers, so that they may increase even more in their faith. To Allah alone belong the forces of the heavens and the earth, and Allah is all-knowing and all-wise. So He may admit believing men and women into gardens under which rivers flow to stay there forever, and absolve them from their sins, and that is a supreme achievement in the sight of Allah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isam. And it's just it's good blessings to start the event with the words of God. Stephen Kinnock has been the MP for Aberavon since 2015, and since 2020, he's also been the Shadow Minister for Asia and the Pacific. He was very keen to support this event, and I want to welcome you on, MP Stephen Kinnock, for a few words on the subject. Thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you so much to the Muslim Council for Wales for organising this event. And I'm unfortunately not Mark Drakeford. As you would have seen, he wasn't able to join us this evening, but Mark kindly passed the invitation on to me, and obviously as a Welsh MP, but also, as was just said, the Shadow Minister for Asia and Pacific. China falls very much within my shadow ministerial responsibilities, and of course what is happening to the Uyghur in Xinjiang province is therefore right at the top of my agenda and the agenda of the entire Labour Party when it comes to our position on foreign policy and on dealing with China. I think it's worth starting with just a quick word about what's been happening in China, particularly since 2013. So I think up until 2013, there was a certain policy mindset in China, which was, of course, based on the Chinese Communist Party being the dominant force in China. But it was, I think, a force that was effectively still very much based on engaging with the rest of the world, building China's economy, opening up to the global economy, and taking I would say, a gradual approach to building China's position in global politics and in the economy. And of course, it's a position that it deserves to have. I mean, it's a country with 1.4 billion people, and it rightly wishes to be at the top table, both economically and politically. And I don't think we should have any difficulty with that. But what we cannot accept is a country that is becoming increasingly nationalistic. And when I say nationalistic, I also think it's a kind of ethno-nationalism, because the dominant ethnic group in China is the Han Chinese. And the Han Chinese dominate the Chinese Communist Party, and they also have a very centralized and single focus on that domination being right across China in terms of Tibet, Xinjiang, also Mongolia, and with a less and less tolerant approach we've seen since 2013 of ethnic minorities and religious minorities in China. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party is a profoundly atheist party, and I think that is also part of what is driving the approach to the Muslim minority Uyghur people. And the big change in 2013 was, of course, President Xi Jinping coming to power. And Xi Jinping is a far more expansionist, and one might even say relatively aggressive politician in comparison with those that came before him at the top of the Chinese Communist Party. So I think that's the context, the political context that we've seen since 2013, an increasingly centralizing, domineering, and pro-Han Chinese set of policies. And that has led to the crackdown that we've been seeing also in Hong Kong, of course, increasingly aggressive approach to Taiwan, and then the crackdown that we've seen in Xinjiang province against the Uyghur. And what we have seen, the actions that we've seen against the Uyghur are without doubt a scar on the conscience of the world. We are seeing a very large mountain of evidence piling up. And I would emphasize that this is not evidence that is being produced by external sources. This is evidence that's being produced by the Chinese government. And there are a number of leading experts. I would particularly recommend everybody that's on this call this evening the work of a German scholar called Adrian Zenz, Z-E-N-Z, who is, of course, a fluent Mandarin speaker and has found a way of accessing Chinese government documents that are documenting the actions that are being taken against the Uyghur people. And he has documented arbitrary detention of over 1 million Uyghur in re-education camps, mass surveillance, the police state that we're seeing, torture, inhumane treatment, enforced separation of children from parents, denial of the right to practice religion or to speak the language, the Turkic language that is the Uyghur language, which is not like Mandarin Chinese at all, and indeed forced labor. Looking at official government data, policy documents, interviews with ethnic minority women in Xinjiang, we've also seen where enforced birth control practices are taking place, including IUDs in being inserted, sterilization and forced abortions. We, of course, saw the haunting images on the Andrew Marr program when Andrew Marr interviewed the Chinese ambassador to the UK, and we saw images of thousands of shaven-headed Uyghur men blindfolded and being led away onto trains to be taken to re-education camps. And we've seen countless testimony. We've seen the numbers in terms of birth rates falling in Xinjiang by a third between 2017 and 2018. One of the big questions that gets asked is, well, is this a genocide? And I think it's important that genocide is depoliticized. It's actually quite an important legal argument about what does or does not constitute a genocide. The crime of genocide is defined in the United Nations Convention on Genocide of 1948. And it's up to a court, in my view, to determine what is or what is not a genocide. But a recent report by 50 high-profile lawyers and experts, I would also recommend this to colleagues on the call. It's by an organization called the New Lines Institute, which is the first independent legal investigation into this issue by this number of legal experts, human rights lawyers, and other legal experts. And they take the 5 definitions of genocide that are in the UN Convention, namely killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures to prevent births, and forcibly transferring children out of the group. So the New Lines Institute looks at each of those 5 elements of the definition of genocide and concludes that what is happening in Xinjiang violates every one of those 5 principles, and that therefore a genocide is taking place in Xinjiang. So we have been working cross-party in Parliament to find ways of how we can get the UK government, which I'm afraid has been shamefully slow in taking action on this issue, to ensure that we never do trade deals with genocidal states. And there's been a very active debate in Parliament because an amendment has been tabled by a Conservative member of Parliament called Nusrat Ghani, to say that an amendment to the trade bill, which is currently going through Parliament, to prevent the British government from ever doing a trade deal with any country that could potentially, based on a predetermination of a group of lawyers or judges, that there's a prima facie case that a genocide is taking place, that we must break off all trade negotiations with any such country. To their shame, the British government has done everything it can to prevent that amendment being voted through, and they have suppressed the rebellion in their party. There was a very large rebellion, and we managed to cut the Conservative majority of 80 in Parliament down to a majority of 18 in the vote that took place last night. But unfortunately, the amendment was defeated. We got a compromise out of it, so there will now be at least a select committee of parliamentarians investigating this issue of genocide, but it's not the same as having judges look at it. And of course, the profound irony here is that the United Kingdom's government's position has always been that genocide is a matter for courts, not politicians, and yet they're preventing the courts to look at it. And what we know is, in order to get the international courts to look at this, the International Criminal Court that goes after individuals guilty of genocide, or the International Court of Justice that goes after governments that are guilty of genocide, you can't get that through unless you get a resolution of the United Nations Security Council. And of course, China and Russia are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and they wield the veto, which prevents this going to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. So we have, as an international community, we have to find a way around this paralysis. And what we were trying to do is say, well, okay, let's take back control. Let's have British judges. If the international courts can't do it because of China and Russia blocking it in the UN, let's get the British courts to look at this issue. And to its shame, the Conservative government prevented that passing. But we shall continue to campaign, I assure you, to raise this issue up the agenda. I have to say, I would like to see more action from Muslim majority countries around the world to show more solidarity with what's happening in Xinjiang province. I'm afraid to say, when we're dealing with an economic superpower like China, they have a program called the Belt and Road Initiative, which they deploy in countries like Pakistan, Turkey, Indonesia, many other Muslim majority countries across the world. And the deal is that you get soft loans that are used for massive infrastructure and other capital projects, but in exchange for you keeping your mouth shut when it comes to criticizing China and Chinese policy. And I'm afraid that we've seen a disappointing lack of action and words from the governments of Muslim majority countries. And I do think it's important that organizations such as the one that has organized this event tonight, and many others who wish to show their solidarity with what's happening to the Uyghur people, use every channel of communication they can to make that point. That just brings me then in conclusion to some of the other actions that we can take against the Chinese government. We in the Labour Party have been calling for months for sanctions to be deployed against the senior Chinese Communist Party officials who've been orchestrating these abuses. There is something called the Magnitsky sanctions, which is where you can impose travel bans and asset freezes against these individuals. We have finally got that to happen. That was actually announced by Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary in Parliament yesterday. He only did it in order to quash the rebellion on the genocide amendment to the trade bill. But anyway, we got a good result, which is now 5 very senior Chinese Communist Party officials who've been orchestrating these abuses in Xinjiang have now been sanctioned by the UK government. They have a travel ban. They are not allowed, and it's been done in coordination with the European Union. So they're not allowed to travel to the EU or the UK. And also all of their assets, their financial assets that they may have in the UK or the EU have been frozen. Secondly, on supply chains, it's vital that we stop the abusive forced labor that's going on. 20% of the world's cotton comes from Xinjiang. Big clothes companies like H&M also provide services, shops such as IKEA that have a lot of cotton. They source a lot of their cotton in Xinjiang. We should be boycotting those, and we should also be ensuring that we change the legislation in the UK to have human rights due diligence in supply chains to ensure that if there's any forced labor in supply chains, that we must prevent any trade and we must block all imports from Xinjiang on that basis. Third, we need full and unfettered access for the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights to Xinjiang so that she can do a full and proper report on the abuses that are taking place there. And finally, we've got to build alliances. I'm very worried that the United Kingdom, whatever your opinion about Brexit, over the last 5 or 6 years, we've become an increasingly isolated country. We've burned certain bridges and alliances, particularly with some of the EU countries. We've got to rebuild those alliances because we know when we're dealing with a massive power like China, Britain alone is not a strategy. Britain working with its allies and also allies in the Indo-Pacific region, democratic countries such as Japan, South Korea, Australia, with the European Union, with the United States, working in concert, in coordination with a coherent strategy. That is the only way that we're going to be able to stand up to China and make it change its behavior. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen Kinnock, for that. Setting the scene perfectly for the political background there from a UK perspective. I'm going to thank as well Ali Akbar as well, because he was the introduction that got us talking to yourself and your office. So Ali Akbar, just a few words, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring in our keynote speaker thereafter.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Muslim Council of Wales for organizing a very sensitive, very important meeting today. And to Stephen Kinnock MP for coming on the show in a short notice. We appreciate that. I think you've got more knowledge about that area than the First Minister. So I know he was going to come onto the show, but I'm sure we got a better knowledge actually, because you are part of, you're a shadow minister for that area. It's actually it was in the news. I don't know, many of you heard the first time any Western nation has taken some sanction, actually. That was in the news last night after so many years. So it was at least some news. It was in the BBC News yesterday. And the Chinese has retaliated by sanctioning against some of the Western country also. I'm sure, I don't know about that on your update, Stephen Kinnock. That was in the news. It's the might against the right, isn't it? The mighty power of China against the rest of the world. In today's reality, actually, there is no human right or human power. It's all about might is right. It's all about economy power. And China is a superpower, and the others are fighting to go against. But as you said, if all the Muslim countries or some of the Muslim countries does get together, I'm sure there could be some result of the effort all around the world the community are putting together. There's no doubt, in my opinion, there's no doubt genocide has been committed. But nobody has the guts to take any action against the mighty China. Our fight has to go on, and we should never forget those brothers and sisters, not only in China, wherever injustice there is to humanity. So because if we do, then I think they will be wiped out without any trace. So my advice to today's and other, and especially to Stephen Kinnock, please keep the fight on, and for the sake of humanity, the sake of justice. So I'd just like to thank again for organizing this, and I think we should keep on putting our voice through for the needy. They can't do anything where they are, and the regime there are not giving access, are they, to the rest of the world? So media like today's and others, and especially, as you said, the British government are not doing as much they should. So through you, if we can pass this to the Parliament, that today is them, tomorrow it could be someone else, and the Rohingyas, you, us, we're all in this bubble, aren't we now? And the justice, we have to fight for the justice. So again, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Ali Akbar.
I hope we get some positive out of this.
Thank you very much. You're supportive of always and very wise words. So we've heard snippets. We've understood a little bit about the political context. We understood a little bit about the economic blocks and the economic powerhouse that is China. And we've got an idea of what could be happening from what we already know. Let's get really into it now. Our speaker, though we've got our keynote speaker, is first of all based in Bahrain, a little bit of a time difference. I really appreciate Arsalan Hidayat for being with us today. He's a Uyghur himself. He's a Uyghur rights activist, born originally from Sydney, lived over in Turkey, now he's over in Bahrain. He's a general secretary for the Uyghur Revival Association, which really sheds light onto and raises awareness for what's happening over in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. He runs a Facebook page, which is the largest in the English language, highlighting the plight of the Uyghurs. And he's a regular contributor on international news media outlets, BBC, CNN, TRT, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, AFP, and many, many others. I could go on introducing him for a while because he speaks so passionately about this, but I'm going to hand this over to Arsalan. He's going to talk about a lot of these subjects. You're going to have questions, just pop it straight into the chat box, and then we'll pick them up at 6:10, and Arsalan will talk through the questions that he's raised. Arsalan, thank you very much. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you very much to the Muslim Council of Wales, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everyone that's watching. I appreciate your questions if you have them. I basically want to start. I wanted to give a long history, but I'm not going to get into that because of time restraints. But we'll start off with not just straight from the concentration camps. I do need to give a bit of context. I at least want to start from the Uyghurs, as mentioned, right now considered a minority of China, but we have always considered ourselves to be independent, and we refer to our land as Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. But you will hear the official name, which is used on the world stage, which is our land is officially known as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and that name was given to us in 1884 during the Qing Dynasty, and that name has pretty much stuck with us. Officially annexed together with Tibet in 1955, and we have to understand that the Chinese Communist Party is not necessarily Chinese. And what I mean by that is, from the get-go, you would have heard of the Great Leap Forward, which I like to refer to as the Great Leap Backward, where a lot of Chinese themselves had starved to death. The Chinese language itself was destroyed, and a simplified version of that, temples were destroyed. And so when we talk about in China, you're not able to practice religion. You can't practice Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, any form of New Age religions like the Falun Gong, Judaism. But you will see churches, you will see mosques, you will see certain temples, but it is a Chinese or communist sanctioned version of those religions. So from the get-go, together with the Chinese, we too were persecuted, again, from the get-go. A lot of our intellectuals, a lot of our professors, a lot of our businessmen were essentially executed because there was this, especially during the Cultural Revolution under Mao, there was this whole sort of a demonization program saying that these rich people, these professors, these intellectuals, these elites are keeping you down, are keeping you poor. And so they were executed right in front of us. And China had various policies, especially in 1980 when the one-child policy was introduced to everyone in China. We Uyghurs and other minorities had the two-child policy. And in 1990, we had something called the Baran Massacre, where the Uyghurs stood up against forceful abortion. And when I'm talking about abortion, babies being aborted at 7, 8, 9 months, even a couple of days before they're born. And so Uyghurs, throughout Chinese communist history, you will see that the Uyghurs stand up to such policies, simply asking for basic human rights, basic religious rights, to be able to have children and not being punished to do so. And then every 10 or so years, there is a culling or a massacre of such people. And then again in 1997, we had something called the Gulja Massacre. Again, a student rally which turned bloody because China decided to bring weapons and like the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. And so on February 5th, 1997, you can look this up, called the Gulja Massacre, where thousands were culled essentially in the winter. And in 2009, you've all heard of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Well, we had one in 2009, the Urumqi massacre, where students were rallying against. There were some teens who were working in the eastern provinces, and this generally happens in the early 2000s during America's global war on terror. China used that as an excuse to target the Uyghurs, telling the world that we too have Muslim extremists. And one of their policies was to get the youth, especially young girls, over to the eastern provinces to work very, very cheap labor. And we've heard of Chinese labor being cheap. Uyghur labor is even cheaper. So you had thousands upon thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, Uyghurs going into these eastern provinces, and the Chinese themselves were losing their jobs. And the Chinese pretty much culled thousands of Uyghurs, essentially of students' age. And that happened on the 26th of June, 2009. And the Uyghurs went legally to the government saying, look, we have all of these Uyghurs missing, what's happening? And the Uyghurs just took to the streets, peaceful protests, carrying the Chinese flag. Again, a repeat of what happened in 1989, students culled. And so this region, many people ask, why are Uyghurs being targeted, or why do China target its minorities? Is because China, while in China there are technically 56 ethnic groups, China doesn't like any difference. They like everything to be harmonious. And as Stephen mentioned a moment ago, sort of this Han-centric, it's got to be our way or the highway. And so, and what we mean by differences, so for example, I'm talking to mainly people in the UK or in Wales, and there are Muslims on this chat. And if I were to ask any Muslim right now, does the Welsh government force you to act stereotypically Welsh? And I'm going to assume stereotypically Welsh means maybe similar to being stereotypically Australian. So a stereotypical Australian would love to go to the beach, free mix, perhaps have a beer on the weekend, something like this. We Muslims, we don't do this, and that's fine. The lifestyles are different, and I don't eat pork, and a typical Welsh person may eat pork. But what the Chinese government would do is, no, I'm not going to have you live your way. You're going to live stereotypically as a Chinese atheist. So you don't want to eat pork? That's seen as separatism. You want to rock a beard? that's, you know, that's seen as separatism, extremism. You want to cover your head, you know, with a piece of material, you want to pray, that's stereotype. Like for them, that's seen as extremism, that's seen as separatism. And so some of the other policies I'll mention is, that's why we see things like, for example, forced, because we are so different. Even me, I am ethnically Uyghur. My parents left right after the Cultural Revolution. And so me looking the way I am, dressing the way I dress, speaking the language that I speak, we are seen as different, and they are trying to make that region as much as Chinese as possible. So one way they do this is to migrate hundreds of thousands of Chinese into the region every year, and give them all the jobs, give them all the education. And so now the population back in 1949 was anywhere between 1 to 5% Han Chinese, and then you had a good 90% Uyghur, and then you had another, you know, 5 to 6, 7% all the other Turkic groups such as Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and Uzbeks. And so you've got that going, and it's gotten to a stage where, you know, I'm all for people marrying whoever they want, but now you see forceful marriages where Han Chinese men, you know, marry Uyghur women. And you may have heard that there is a population problem in China where you've got a huge population of men and not that many women. And now, and with the Uyghurs, it's the opposite. We have a lot more women. And so for the really hardworking Chinese officials, our women are given to them as what we call in Islamic terms, ghanima, or bounty. They are essentially gifted or awarded with our girls. So coming to the concentration camps, as Stephen mentioned before, by Adrian Zenz, you know, the number just above 1 million. There are other numbers out there based on, again, Adrian Zenz kind of updated his number to about 2 or 3 million based on the open resource he was able to get to, seeing the sizes of the camps. Recently, there was around 300 plus new camps that have been found via satellite imagery, based on the sales of beds, based on the sizes of these camps. Some of these camps are at least a football stadium in length, if not 2 or 3 football stadiums in size, with crematories next to them. And so one issue one number that we can't seem to get is the actual number of deaths that are happening in the camps. And I'll tell you how these people are dying in the camps. Now, I've had I don't know if you would say honor or opportunity to actually interview former concentration camp detainees. And they were only able to be let out either because they had a spouse who was of another nationality, or they themselves were of a different citizenship from the get-go. So one example I can give you is by a woman by the name of Zumrat Dawood. She was in the camps for approximately 2 months, and if it wasn't for her Pakistani husband, who threatened the Chinese authorities as well as the Pakistan authorities in Beijing, saying that he would go to Wall Street Journal and other media if they didn't release his wife. And so what she had told me was that they are given 400 to 500 calorie. Actually, before we get into life of the camp, before they actually go into the camp, they are given a full medical health checkup from head to toe: blood, urine, gynecological, eye test, speech test, voice test, testing all the organs, and you guys can guess what for, and all their DNA is recorded and set. And so this happens to every Uyghur to see who actually has healthy organs, and we'll get into the sort of organ harvesting a bit later on. But, you know, in the morning they wake up, they're given a breakfast, some sort of soupy meal together with a bun. And what she had told me was there was, you know, it looked as if this bun was just lying on the floor, but that's all they had to eat, anywhere between 400 to 500 calories. So they were, you know, food deprived and sleep deprived, and the size of the cells. They were saying that anywhere between some concentration camp detainees told me that there were 20 to 25 to a cell, and one told me there was 45 to 50 in a cell, and the cells were so small that not everyone can sleep at one time. You had to take shifts in sleeping. The hygiene, everyone had to use a bucket shared by everyone, and that bucket was changed every 24 hours if they were lucky, if not 48 hours. There is a water area, but that water area is only used once a week. And every day, every morning, they are made, and this is probably the least of all the torture and denigration. They are made to take indoctrination classes. And in the classes, the main thing is that they are taught that God doesn't exist, there is no Allah, and that the Communist Party provides for all. And every Friday, being it be the Muslim holiday, where generally Muslims will go to prayer, the people in the camps would have to write repentance letters to Xi Jinping to repent, because they had repented to God before. And these letters they were written on Friday and sent out on Monday. Every morning, especially the women, they were injected, or they are injected with some sort of substance that they don't know actually what it was, but they told I've interviewed 4 women about this, and all of them told me the same thing. One, their period stopped coming, and it turned them into a zombie-like state. They stopped caring about their family. They weren't thinking straight, and they didn't feel hungry. It was a very strange state, and I only described it as they pretty much turned into zombies. They didn't feel anything. The women, especially, that you would have heard of, or you would read about the recent BBC report on systemic rape. The women are gang raped. And I have talked to a man a Uyghur scholar by the name of Abdulwali Ayub. He's a male, and he told me that he too was gang raped. So it looks as though in these camps, it's not just women that are being gang raped, but men are also being gang raped by the guards. And it's gotten to a stage where in that report, a woman by the name of Tursunay Ziawuddin, which I have interviewed as well, she told me that the camps are now used as brothels, not just for the guards to have their way with the women there, but outsiders can come in, pay a fee, and depending on how pretty the woman is, the more that they would pay for it. And so we see China making money off these camps as well. So through the brothels, through the organ harvesting. So a concentration camp detainee by the name of Gulbaha Jalilova, she told me that she was moved from camp to camp. Gulbaha Jalilova spent, and you can Google her name, she's been interviewed many times. I've interviewed her myself. She was in the camp for 15 months. She's actually a Kazakh national. She's never been a Chinese citizen at all. She had been going to and fro from Chinese occupied Turkestan to Kazakhstan doing trade. And it just so happened to be, she was taken on, 2007, I believe it was 2017. She went in to the region at the hotel, was going to buy some goods in Urumqi and then send it back to Kazakhstan to sell. And she was taken. She was given a Chinese ID. She wasn't even born in the region. She's ethnically Uyghur. There are hundreds and thousands of Uyghurs living in Kazakhstan. She's ethnically Uyghur, but she wasn't born in the region, had never had Chinese identity whatsoever. And she went in a few camps. In one of the camps, she actually saw, it was a camp / hospital where a woman's kidney was taken. She asked her what happened to that woman. She was on a drip, and there was a bag hanging off the left side of her body. And she said, that woman's kidneys were just taken. And so we know of this. If you simply type into Google halal organ harvesting, it's a situation where the rich of the Middle East, and Stephen pointed out, the Middle East really should be acting up. But unfortunately, there's this sick trade going on where the rich of the Middle East, because there's an organ shortage here and they have the money, they go to China and get organs. And Chinese hospitals are actually advertising this. And if you go on my Twitter account, you can see mosques specifically set for a Middle Eastern crowd, so to speak, because within the hospitals, we're talking about a region who demolishes mosques and doesn't allow for halal food. But at these hospitals, they have mosques in the hospital and they have Muslim canteens in the hospitals, and they are interviewing with the Middle Easterners, and they are opting for these Uyghur organs or organs from Uyghurs, because Uyghurs are Muslims, Uyghurs don't drink, Uyghurs don't eat pork, and so for some reason they felt uncomfortable taking an organ from someone who is not Muslim. And regardless, an organ is an organ at the end of the day, but it's just sick to think that you're going to opt for something. And literally, if you listen to some of the recordings that have been made by various channels out there, where they are interviewing the doctors saying that, we'll give you money back, we'll give you money back if that organ doesn't work, or if that organ doesn't work or it rejects, we'll get you another one. There are so many organs on tap. They've got a whole database on this, and this is recorded all over Eastern and Western media. And as I mentioned before, the unfettered access. So people talk about, is what's happening there a genocide? Is it really happening? Is it fake news? Well, we've always said, if you're not hiding anything, why not let people in? So I'll tell you my own personal story. My father-in-law was in a camp for 10 months. And my father-in-law, if you simply type his Google or YouTube his name, he's a famous actor and comedian. His name is Adil, A-D-I-L, M-I-J-I-T. He's the equivalent of Jim Carrey in the West. That's how popular he is. So the people actually going into these camps, the Chinese narrative is, we are educating the youth. Uyghurs have nothing to do. And through boredom, they catch on to extremist videos and they blow people up. People that have towed the CCP line pretty much all their life, like my father-in-law, who worked for the CCP for a good, just above 30 years. He actually studied in the same building with Peng Liyuan. Peng Liyuan is the wife of Xi Jinping. So my father-in-law studied at the Central Academy of Arts and Drama in Beijing, and she studied at the Conservatorium of Music in Beijing. And back in the mid-80s, those two institutes were in one building. So I've always made the case that, well, if you had to re-educate my father-in-law, why don't you re-educate your wife? Because they pretty much went through the same education system. And so he eventually came out, but now he's being used as a propaganda tool against me. So every time I make a video, I make an interview, they'll have my father-in-law driving in a Ferrari saying, look, he's living the high life. Why are you saying all these lies? Well, one, my father-in-law, I'm married to his daughter living with me, like in Turkey. I have 2 children, his grandchildren. His wife, my mother-in-law, lives with me. His son lives with me. How come he cannot get a Chinese passport and leave the area, which we have been calling for a good 2 years now? So 1, people cannot go in for unfettered access, and 2, people cannot come out. And so definitely China is hiding something, but when we call for this unfettered access, I'm very worried that it may happen like what happened with the World Health Organization when they covered up COVID. So it's a situation where my take on COVID was that, as if I murdered someone in my home and the police came to my home, and then I told the police to go away, come back in 1 year so I can clean up all the evidence and then come, that's what I'm worried about. Because we have seen reports where Uyghurs, sometimes when journalists go into the area, Uyghurs are paid the equivalent of $18 a day to go into the mosques and pray. They are paid to dress and to rock the beard or to dress in Islamic gear when they know a foreign investigation team. And generally, when they mean foreign journalists, generally it's the ones from the Middle East, because that's how they convince their locals in the Middle East that everything's a-okay, because they'll get someone influential from Middle East, from Bahrain, from Saudi Arabia, from Oman or Dubai. They'll go there, they'll film a documentary of, you may have seen these clips, Uyghurs singing, if you're happy and we clap your hands, and they're satisfied with that because they don't know any better. And when they go into the hotels, that they have the holy book of the Muslims, the Quran, in the hotel. They have a prayer mat. So that's the way that they cover this up. But it's gotten to a stage where now they've built crematories. And when we're talking about the deaths, a former concentration camp detainee by the name of Mikirikul Dursun. She told me that while she stayed there, within a 3-month period, she witnessed 9 people die from one cell. And now, according to Adrian Zenz, he said there was a minimum, anywhere between minimum 500, if not slightly above 1,000. And this was back in 2018 or towards the end of 2017 when he gave these numbers. Now that number has jumped anywhere 1,500 or slightly more. And I've just mentioned the sizes of these camps. Tursunay Ziawuddin, the woman who was interviewed for the systematic rape BBC article, she said she witnessed 3 a week that died from just one cell. And so God knows actually how many people are dying there. So it's not a thing like what Hitler did, where it was just plain slaughter of the Jews, which was horrific in itself. But China found a way to profit. So through the brothels, and generally speaking, the people seem to be dying through torture, food deprivation, and sleep deprivation. So they're making money through the brothels. They're making money through the slave labor trade. And last year, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute found out that 83 companies were directly or indirectly involved in their supply chain, that they had found that there were Uyghurs working, and there were ads. I mean, these ads are plastered on social media saying, look, I've got 1,000 Uyghurs ready to go, you know, and these ads are quite open if you can read the Chinese language. Another thing that they're making money off is the hair of the Uyghurs. So Uyghurs, generally speaking, have very long hair, and they braid their hair. And depending on how many braids a woman has, will generally tell you if she's married or not, what region she's from, if she's carrying a baby, you know, like it's very symbolic. So as soon as especially a Uyghur woman enters into the camp, her hair is shaved. And if you simply type in Uyghur hair, Xinjiang hair, you will see the reports where recently in the States, 13 tons of this hair was seized. And a lot of this hair is actually used for wigs and hair extensions. And currently the statistic was in the amount of over $100 million in 2019 they're making. For some resources, you can follow Radio Free Asia Uyghur Service, which covered this. And you can follow the Uyghur Human Rights Project, which gives you academic works of all of the things that I've just mentioned, with research-based, with video-based, with references in an academic style. And yeah, so now we're getting to a stage where it's quite open, as Steve mentioned before. It does fall under the Geneva Convention of Genocide, and the United States, the Canadian Parliament, Holland have labeled it a genocide. But again, with China's influence, as Stephen mentioned, and he mentioned a very important year, 2013, 2012, 13, 14. Those were the years where she was sort of implementing and making those connections in the Middle East. And therefore, when 2017 comes up, where the camps are in full throttle, they pretty much sold the Middle East, promising them huge financial gains. And especially with Turkey, a country with ethnic and religious ties to the Uyghurs, backstabbing their own Uyghurs because they've sort of cut their ties with the United States or Europe or NATO in general, and they've opted to go with, strengthen their ties with Russia and China. And they've, even recently, that a vote was trying to be pushed in the Turkish parliament. And the AK party, which is Erdogan's party, is supposed to be an Islamic-based party. He's in coalition with a Turkish nationalist party who is supposed to stand up for Turkish rights. Both of them vetoed that vote to label what was happening in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan as a genocide. And so, yeah, I could go on and on. If there are any questions, if anyone would like anything specific, that's just a very small gist of what's happening. And if we go into sort of China's surveillance state, I had the honor of interviewing Yale. I forgot her name now. Her name's Yale. There's a really good article in The Intercept, and you can catch the interview on Talkies Turkestan, where Muslims or Uyghurs are tracked. And you know, we talk about surveillance, right? Even us in the West and everywhere else, we're surveilled, but not to the extent where you have, you know, Welsh officials living with you in your home. That doesn't happen, does it? So we have, if you type in 1.1 Chinese officials living in the homes of Uyghurs, why do they live in the homes of Uyghurs? To check whether they pray, whether they speak the Uyghur language to their children, because the Uyghur language, by and large, is also banned from the public space. And initially, when these camps were open, most of the camp population were males. So a lot of the people left at home were females, the wives and the daughters of the men. And a lot of these Chinese officials were raping the women. And you had 12, 13, 14-year-old girls fall pregnant. There were lots of stories of suicides happening, you know, and your phone, everyone, there was a time, I think it was 2015 or 16, where everyone decided not to use smartphones anymore, because in smartphones, you were forced to put certain apps. Now you have to have a smartphone with these apps, and what these apps do is track what you look on social media. They track if you listen to any religious text. They track if you call someone from overseas. So for example, to this day, for the past 3 years, going on 2.5, 3 years, my father-in-law has not been able to contact his own family, because simply contacting us or us contacting him will get him into trouble, because you're not allowed to have contact in the outside world unless the Chinese officials are sitting with you, they give you a script to read off, and they tell, you know, he tells his wife or daughter or for me to visit him, and we know what's going to happen the moment we get off at Urumqi airport, you know. So the surveillance is amazing, and it's gotten to a stage where Uyghurs, you know, I don't know if you know about these sort of societies, especially you would have heard of this in, you know, in Soviet Russia as well, where the Uyghurs have gotten to a stage where they are spying on each other, because that's what you have to do. Because if you do not spy on your neighbor, you know, most likely your neighbor's going to spy on you. And even if your neighbor doesn't spy on you, later on, if the government finds out that your neighbor did something, you'll be punished because you didn't report that in on time. So every move you make is monitored. And now we are approaching the month of Ramadan, and you will see, you know, these beer drinking competitions suddenly spurt out, free food and drinks given to students to make sure that they are not fasting. The surveillance is so outrageous where they're able to check what time you use your electricity and water. So if they suddenly see that during the month of Ramadan, your electricity is going on at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, or you've got water going on, or you're cooking, or the lights are on, you'll get a knock the next day saying, well, were you preparing to fast? You know, were you preparing suhoor, like the breakfast to fast? And so, yeah, this is just off the top of my head, a quick summary of what's going on. I mean, we could spend hours on each topic, which I have done. So if you want to get into a more in-depth look on each sort of topic, visit our page on Talkies Turkestan, whether it be Facebook or YouTube, and all the videos are there. And we've interviewed, as Steve mentioned before, Adrian Zenz, Ethan Gutman. I've interviewed people from a very good organization to follow, is the Interparliamentary Alliance Against China. I've had the honor of interviewing forget his name, Luc de Pavlo?
Luc de Pulford.
Luc de Pulford, that's right.
Yeah,
I mixed it up
he's a great man.
Yeah, I mixed him up with Drew Pavlo, which is a rights activist in Australia. And last week, actually a couple of days ago, I had Benedict Rogers. And as Stephen mentioned, I'm hoping to get Nusrat Ghani on. So hopefully, Stephen, you can help me with that connection after the show. So yeah, if you have any, yeah.
Thank you, Arsalan. Lot to take in. I was trying to follow and just share as much as I can.
Yeah.
You know, I took my video off because some of this is like gut wrenching, you know, when you hear this. Abby's here. Hi, Abby. We did a talk together to the wider public about a month ago, and it was retrospective. Pete Harrison's here as well, Major Pete Harrison. He served in Bosnia at the time of the genocide in Srebrenica. Abby's from Remembering Srebrenica in Wales, the Wales Board of Remembering Srebrenica, the charity. Now, the two of them got together to deliver a talk, and it was like looking back and talking about what happened. And just before that, as a nation, as a world, we had Holocaust Memorial Day. And again, you know, we teach that to our children, and what's the saying and what's the brand of it? It's never again, isn't it? And it's happened before. Not much you can do. You can donate to the charity and you can raise awareness of what happened, but it's all happened. So this is happening. This is happening in our time right now. And I want to know, what can we do? And there's Aspa Abdulazim, I'm sure everybody's asking the question is, what can we do to support the Uyghurs? What can we do? You know, yes, we can write to our MPs, and you know, Stephen Kinnock MP is an evidence of what he's doing in his capacity as a lawmaker in Parliament, our central Parliament too. But what can we do at a ground level that actually impacts and makes a difference or makes a change? Because hearing this, you know, it's going to be my children that looks back and probably, I pray to God it's not, but probably looks back and says, well, you know, that's what happened in East Turkestan. You know, that's what happened to the Uyghurs, just like we're looking back in Srebrenica. That's why we're looking back at the Holocaust. Over to you, Arslan, and then I'm going to come to you, Stephen, the same question again, please.
Yeah, so this is a very open question. It sort of depends on who you are, where you are at. So at the moment, for example, we've got a campaign encouraging students in their late teens, you know, especially those undergrads, postgrads, to see whether or not China, the Chinese government, is involved in your universities. I don't know how many students are watching at the moment, and to see, because very recently, there was a report done in the United States where 1,000 Chinese students, they had their visas revoked because it came out to be that they were spying and that they were stealing intellectual property from the various universities and institutes that they were involved in, to see whether or not your university is aiding in the technology. Are they involved in countries such as companies such as Huawei or Hikvision or Dahua? The AI technology, are they aiding in that? Are they aiding in the security surveillance apparatus? Are they aiding in you know, upgrading or giving the technology which helps them with the organ harvesting? So find that out. Find out if you have a Confucius Institute at your university. And a Confucius Institute is pretty much a soft way of China introducing itself to the West. You know, this institute looks soft and cuddly, you know, teaching Chinese, teaching the Chinese culture, but it actually, you know, propagates to the West about why it does what it does. It gives good reason. And for anyone who doesn't know of what the Chinese Communist Party is, how it works, its system, you can very much fall into the trap of, well, you know what, that's not too bad. You know, it's a pretty good plan. And so we have that going with the students, as we mentioned before, at a simple level. If we're talking simple social media, now social media, so things like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all of these things are banned in China. You know, use this thing use it as a weapon, because China, even though it thinks it doesn't care about what the West thinks, China very much cares what the West thinks of it. It very much has when I say China, I'm talking about the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people themselves. The Chinese people themselves are also under its oppression, and you will never see, you know, the Chinese themselves, the ones that do speak out, disappear or end up 6 feet under themselves. So you know, share any articles, news, write about it, teach yourself, educate yourself about what the Chinese Communist Party is, educate others. I mean, even when I first started, you know, I was only talking to a few people. So from my perspective, doing this for years, there has been lots and lots of change, and the reach, and it's gotten to a stage where a lot of the world powers, the UK, United States, Australia, you know, they're catching on. They're finally realizing we cannot use the appeasement policies of the late 80s and 90s, which was that, you know what, China is a big country. We've got to isolate Russia and kick them out. Let's turn China into a, you know, eventually it'll become a liberal democratic state, and that hasn't happened. Surprisingly, you know, Taiwan has been leading the way in that regard. So I would urge, you know, Stephen to do more dealings with Taiwan rather than do them with the Republic of China rather than the People's Republic of China. And so, yeah, just everyone, like, within your scope, within your field, you do what you can, and eventually, you know, what's the word? Like, bubbles will turn into, you know, a tidal wave. So, for example, even with the story of Tursunay Ziauddin, I'll tell you a little story. I visited Tursunay in Istanbul, Turkey, back in August 2020. I visited her. I saw her. I met with her, and she had just got off the plane of Kazakhstan. She was in there, like, I saw her on the 3rd or 4th day. She was sick. She was literally about to die. I thought she was about to die. And I made a few phone calls, and as I mentioned, the Uyghur Human Rights Project, and eventually the US State Department wanted to get involved, and now she's in the USA. You know, long story short, she was able to give a testimony. So, like, that little action, one or two phone calls, you know, saved her life, got that story out, a lot of testimony, and now that is being used as evidence to, you know, perhaps it may encourage what's happening in the UK with the trade amendment, and it's encouraging many other nations and ministries and even local councils as well, because we've seen that even China affects and influences even local members, if not state. Especially we've seen this in Australia as well, where they influence professors and deans of universities, and obviously boycott Chinese products. And now, when I say boycott Chinese products, this is not a racist thing, because if you've seen if the product is definitely coming out of China and it's exporting, it's a big company, right? What people don't understand is the way that companies work in China is that these major companies, right, have to give a share, or the Chinese company has to be involved in the company. So, for example, the Chinese Communist Party may take 40 or 49% of the company. So when you are dealing with Chinese goods, you are essentially funding or sort of indirectly helping the surveillance, the capture of the Uyghurs, and the less we buy, the less, you know, obviously China makes, and it cannot run its concentration camps, it cannot pay its PLA, it cannot pay its police. So that's a big thing. I know it's hard to avoid, but if you're normally, say, buying 10 things made in China, this week buy 9 things, and then buy 8 things, and go cold turkey eventually. So, yeah.
Thank you, Arslan. I'm going to be selling my, I'm going to dispose of my phone and tip it in nothing, so I've got Hawaii. Shame. Stephen, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you very much. And what a very powerful and moving set of remarks that Arslan made there. And he really did set out the appalling abuses that we're seeing. In terms of what to do practically, I mean, it is sometimes challenging because of the size and power and impact that China makes. It can seem like something of an overwhelming challenge to deal with, but it has to be done, and the only way to do it is to build networks amongst communities, but also networks amongst countries, and in essence coalitions of countries. But that has to start from the bottom up. The only way to make governments take action is by voters pressing them to do the right thing. And so just a few ideas in terms of what concretely could be done. I mean, I certainly think it might be useful for the Muslim Council of Wales, and perhaps in concert with the Muslim Council of Britain, to write to the high commissioners and ambassadors of all of the Muslim majority countries here in the UK, and to say, look, we as the Muslim Council of Britain or Wales, we just feel that what's happening in Xinjiang is no longer acceptable, and your country should be withdrawing from the Belt and Road Initiative, because the Belt and Road Initiative plays a massive role in terms of bouncing countries into not taking a political stance that the Chinese government doesn't want them to take. So at some point, these countries have got to look at themselves in the mirror and say, are we going to continue this culture of dependency and allow ourselves to be intimidated, or are we actually going to stand up in solidarity with our people, really, in terms of the Uyghur people? I think another thing could be a debate. If you can get a petition of more than 100,000 people, you can force a debate in the UK Parliament. So maybe the Muslim Council could launch a petition that we need to have a debate in Parliament about what's happening in occupied East Turkestan or Xinjiang. We can't just allow the government to say, well, we've sanctioned 4 senior Chinese Communist Party officials. That's it now, job done. We can move on to the next thing. And I think Arsalan is right that the Chinese government and Chinese Communist Party do actually think about public relations. Just look at the way they've retaliated on the sanctions now. I think they've sanctioned 10 EU politicians. I apparently seem to have dodged that particular bullet. I'm not on the sanction list, but Adrian Zenz has been sanctioned. And a good colleague of mine who's a member of the European Parliament, Reinhard Bütikofer, has been sanctioned as well. So there's they are reacting because they don't like it. And maybe a debate in Parliament about this issue, but that requires a petition of 100,000 people to force the debate, because I'm afraid we can't rely on the UK government to do that. And then the idea of identifying particularly companies that are using cotton. Xinjiang is the cotton basket of the world. It provides 20% of the world's cotton, and it's a sure bet that a lot of that cotton is picked through forced labor. So let's educate ourselves about which companies are sourcing cotton from there, and then perhaps launch a petition to boycott those companies, and also to press the UK government to amend. There's a law called the Modern Slavery Act, but the Modern Slavery Act is toothless. It doesn't have enough enforcement provisions. We need a new piece of legislation that has due diligence, human rights due diligence in supply chains, where companies are forced to make a statement about it being sure that there's no forced labor in their supply chains. And if they don't make a statement that is convincing and legally watertight, then that company would be forced to close down its operations where those supply chains are clearly not clean from a human rights perspective. So that's just a few ideas about what you could be doing to petition, press, campaign, lobby, shame the government and other governments to take action, and make this point that the world has not prosecuted a genocide successfully since the Nuremberg trials in 1947. Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, now what we're seeing in Xinjiang. How many times is the world going to turn a blind eye and to actually intervene and stop a genocide whilst it's actually happening, rather than looking back over history and wishing that we had actually acted and done something? And I would recommend that you see the testimony by Holocaust survivors, videos by Holocaust survivors, some incredible men and women who did video testimony that they sent to Boris Johnson, pushing him, urging him to get his government to support the genocide amendment to the trade bill. And still that couldn't cut through. But when the Board of Deputies, what about teaming up with the Board of Jewish Deputies? What a powerful thing that would be if the Muslim Council for Britain teamed up with the Board of Jewish Deputies in this country and jointly worked to press the government to take action, because the Jewish community in the United Kingdom, I can tell you, has been speaking out extremely powerful and extremely strongly against what is happening in Xinjiang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Very, very useful practical ideas. And thank you very much, Arsalan, as well. We're going to take you up on some of that. I'm going to actually reach back out to you to draft some of those letters, work with you to get some of that done. And the Board of Deputies, we've got a solid, good relationship with the Board of Deputies, and we will be reaching out to Sheila and see what we can do to kind of work together in putting something together. And just also 100,000 signatures needed on a petition for central government. I think it's only 100 in Welsh government. So that's, you know, a starting point to start the debate in Senate here in Wales. Katie, you had a question. I'm going to open, if you don't mind, Katie, if you wanted to ask directly, unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Couldn't find my button. Oh, I was just, I mean, it's just so awful. I put this in the chat, but I'm really, really shocked. But when I actually went to Hong Kong. I was just mentioning on the chat, but I went to Hong Kong. I went to pick my daughter up, who'd actually been in Hong Kong for 18 months in November of 2019. And turned out we were in the middle of all the riots. And when I say the riots, the protests. And I have a great feeling towards those people, and I now see that the government is just stamping on them. So I'm very glad to hear that there are, you know, something we can do, because it's just so terrible. And so, Stephen, I thank you for those ideas, and I'm the chair of the Interfaith Council for Wales, and I will certainly do what I can to support if we're going to do anything in terms of petitions and letters and so on. I did have a question. I just wondered, and you might not know the answer to this, but are these organ donations being sold around the world? Do we know, or are they being kept in China? I can't hear you.
Yeah, generally speaking, the ones that need the organs will actually go into China, have the operation over there. Because either they've been, I mean, it's very, I don't know if you would actually blame the patient for going. Like, these people are generally on, you know, they're about to die. They've been on the organ waiting list for ages. There are, I don't know if a law has been passed, but I know a conversation in Parliament about banning UK citizens from going to China to get those organs. And literally they have a list, and essentially there is also a Uyghur organ surgeon who currently resides in the UK by the name of Enver Tohti, E-N-V-E-R, space Tohti, T-O-H-T-I, and he carried out the harvesting of organs of Uyghurs. He was forced to, and through his testimony, he said that he pretty much they executed half executed a Uyghur, and pretty much they put him on the table, and he's been in a few situations where he's had to take out the organs while the person's still alive who's been executed. So generally what seems to be going on is every time there is an order, essentially that's what, it's not someone dies, let's quickly, who's next? No, it's they literally order, and then they'll carry out an execution or a half execution. And while the person's alive, extract the organs, and then the person will die on the table. So generally speaking, the operations themselves are happening in China themselves.
Thank you, Arslan. Horrific. That's very, very horrific. And hopefully that's answered your question, Katie. Was there anybody else that would like to ask a question? It's open floor. You can unmute yourself, or you can ask a question directly in the chat box.
It's Naveed speaking. I just got a quick question for Stephen. Thank you for your contribution this evening. And I think you make a pertinent point in terms of the economics, in terms of that region being the cotton basket of the world. And I think if you can put pressure on the companies who, you know, usually rely on good publicity, that's one way forward. In terms of the China's, you know, the New Silk Route, the Road Belt Initiative, as somebody who's of Pakistani origin, I know how much China's invested in Pakistan. It's in the tens and tens of billions. And so is there an argument to be made that powerful Western countries, if they were to take up the mantle and invest in these countries and take away some of that power from China, that's one way forward? Because it seems to me that China over the last 10, 15 years in Africa and Asia has just gone in, you know, they're building the railways, they're building the ports, the infrastructure, and the way to combat it is through economics, because as soon as these things get up and running, I can only see China getting more powerful economically, and things become harder to change.
Yeah, Naveed, I agree with you that the international community has been unbelievably naive and complacent for many years now, particularly since 2013, when we saw a step change in China's posture, if you like, on the world stage. And we've been asleep at the wheel. We've been reducing our international engagement. We've certainly allowed China in Africa and also in countries like Pakistan to just come in with very fast money, with few strings attached in terms of the actual impact of the projects that they're putting forward, which, by the way, many of them are a disaster from the point of view of climate change, because much of the Belt and Road Initiative is going into carbon-intensive activity. And we've almost withdrawn from the scene and allowed the Belt and Road Initiative to become the dominant force in terms of the international aid programs. And of course, the Chinese government has made it clear that, okay, well, we're going to put these soft loans, capital projects, human resources development projects in place. But the quid pro quo is that you keep your mouths shut when it comes to China's international policy and whatever else we might be doing domestically as well. So you're absolutely right. You put your finger on it. And I despair, really, when I look at the policy of this UK government now, which is to remove our commitment to spending 0.7% of our GDP on international aid programs. So we're actually going in the wrong direction in terms of what we should be doing in terms of building influence around the world. And I think you're right that the step has to be for now. I think we need to see a transatlantic alliance, and particularly based on countries that have a concern around what's happening with China. It shouldn't be necessarily only limited to democratic countries, I don't think, but it does need to be countries where we've got certain common shared values, a sense of common purpose. We need to come together, I think, and create a global fund which will enable us to compete more effectively with China, both in terms of technology, everything from artificial intelligence to quantum computing to internet standards, but also in terms of delivering capital projects and supporting economies in transition and developing countries, and particularly in China's neighborhood. And I think that the G7 that's taking place in the UK this year, because of course the UK is the president, has the chair of the G7 this year, is an outstanding opportunity for us to begin that process. I think it's actually good that the Prime Minister has invited South Korea and Australia and India to join the G7 this year in Cornwall, but that's not enough. We've got to build that out and create a real coalition of countries, a transatlantic coalition, also with the democracies in the Indo-Pacific region. So it's a big rebuilding job. I mean, this is going to take a long time because we've been asleep at the wheel for too long. But it has to start somewhere, and I think the G7 in the summer, you know, the British government needs to make a real success of that, and dealing with China needs to be at the heart of the agenda for that meeting.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for that question, Naveed. I'm going to go over to Abby, if you'd like to unmute yourself, introduce yourself and your question, then I'll go to Ahmed.
Thanks, Mohammed. It wasn't really a question, more just to say that thank you very much, Arsalan and Stephen, for everything I've heard this evening. Just to say that I echo what Katie said, in that I'm the co-chair of Remembering Srebrenica for Wales, and we stand in solidarity with everything that you've sort of said this evening, and just to say that we will do anything that we can from the Bosnian community and what we do to represent the Muslims of Bosnia and what happened to them in Srebrenica. So anything that we can do, and I've taken on board some of Stephen's recommendations, so it's just to say that we stand in solidarity and we'll do anything we can with the Interfaith Council, Muslim Council, and anyone that we can help with. So that was just to say thank you very much, and we'll do all we can to help.
Thank you, Abby. That's really kind of you, and that's good, because actually from the outcome of this there's three of organizations, you know, from Wales that are can band together and start reaching out and raising the awareness. So I'll reach out to yourself and Katie directly, and then make a roadmap forward for that to happen, taking on board Stephen's really, you know, practical advice straight after I sell my phone, right? I'm going to hand over to Ahmed. Welcome, Ahmed. Introduce yourself. I don't think we've met before. I can't see you very well, but please introduce yourself and over to whatever question or statement you'd like to make.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Stephen, I think I've put a message in the chat, really, but you know, you've mentioned obviously some lobbying that people can do, but our CLP actually did write to the leader of the Labour Party with regards to the pledges that he signed up to, which was the Muslim Council of Britain pledges. And one of those pledges, which is Pledge 10, during his leadership campaign, was about human rights abuses in Palestine, Kashmir, Rohingya, and Xinjiang for the Uyghurs. So that was picked up, and a letter was sent to his office, and a response was received last month, actually. And I think if you were to read the letter, or anybody was to read the letter yourselves, you would see that it's just regurgitated nonsense, to be fair, quite frankly, because it didn't really give any other thing which was more substantial for people who are very passionate about these human rights abuses and causes for the leader to address. So that's been pushed back. So I think, you know, when you mention that, you know, for lobbying via Muslim Council of Wales or Britain, I think Muslim Council of Britain have done that, and conversations have been taking place with the, I know there's a new Secretary General in place for the MCB, and Hassan Judy is the Assistant Secretary General. So we've had conversations with him privately for MCB to take up that mantle, because they're the ones who put those pledges in place in the first instance, of course. And it's as party members and others to actually hold, from a grassroots perspective, to see what the opinion is and what's going forward. And it's good to see, obviously, there is some political activity taking place, but I think still the Labour Party does need to do more.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and I agree with you that there's always more that we can and should and must be doing. And you know, I think on the issue of the Uyghur, I mean, we've been pretty consistent over certainly since April of last year, when Keir became leader, and indeed before that, the party's been clear that the UK government must do more, and we are utterly baffled as to why it's taken the government so long, for example, to deploy the Magnitsky sanctions, these global human rights sanctions. For example, after some of the crackdown in Belarus that you will remember, the UK government took 2 weeks to sanction a number of the senior people around the president of Belarus. They've done the same with the Saudi Arabians with the murder of Khashoggi. They were pretty rapid to sanction senior people in Myanmar, but it's taken them until now to sanction Chinese Communist Party officials. So, and Keir called on Boris Johnson months ago in Prime Minister's questions to take action on the issue of the Uyghur, and Lisa Nandy certainly, and I have been pretty sort of solid on this, I think. So we're making some inroads and having some impact, but I think we should always be open to suggestions around what we could be doing that would be more impactful. And I whether you'd like to take that offline, Ahmed, I mean, it's an area certainly that concerns me greatly, because you mentioned, for example, Kashmir, that's in my region. Of course, the appalling abuse of the Rohingya people in Myanmar, that's also my region. We could have a whole other Zoom call on that, and you know, the lack of action that has been taken against the Myanmar government on what looks to me like a genocide of the Rohingya. So there's so many issues that we could and should be doing more, and I'd be very happy to take that issue with you offline, if you know, so we can talk about what concretely the party could be doing that would be more effective.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Thank you for that question, Ahmed. And you mentioned Rohingya. When we were speaking internally, the two topics were Rohingya and the Uyghurs. So there'll be a follow-up talk coming up, possibly after Ramadan, covering the same. And Stephen, if you don't mind, I'll reach out to you directly to join us on that one in the same capacity as you have done today. I'm not seeing any other further hands go up. And I'm not seeing any chats being questions being asked in the chat box. So if there's anything anybody wants to ask, please do ask it. Otherwise, I'm going to start bringing the event to a close. Just going to give a moment if anybody wanted to comment.
Yeah, Mohammed, can I just add on the Rohingyas? When you are deciding to do the program, we can, because we have been doing 2 or 3, 4 programs regarding Rohingyas in British Muslim community. So I can get some light into this, some speakers, the key speakers who has what they've done, and if they can come onto that program, and they can probably give you more, and especially with Stephen, it'd be even better, because I've been involved in 2 or 3 programs myself by Rohingyas.
Perfect.
I can get those speakers involved.
I'll pick up with you directly on that, Sasa, and speak about it. Your help is always, as usual, invaluable. So thank you very much.
Mohammed, Sasa, can I just
go ahead, Sasa.
Yes, some input, please, into this. Well, thank you so much for organizing this evening's insight into the Uyghur situation. Obviously, we've all been somewhat aware that the sort of genocide that's been going on in the Xinjiang region, but with today's program, I'm sure many of the people who have been fortunate enough to have attended this program, that with the detailed analysis that Arsalan has given us has obviously shocked and somewhat infuriated myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people as well. I mean, we knew there were certain things that were going on, certain aspect of it, but to have graphic details of what's been going on is absolutely shocking. And of course, yes, this is something we need to take up quite seriously. And as a Muslim, as a human being, I think it's all our duty to congregate the whole troops and the whole humanity to act upon this, and of course as the Interfaith Council of Wales and the other faith leaders within our community, I think we have to make it a voice that will be listened to. I think it has to be done collectively and on one platform to be able to. And Stephen, thank you so much for your input as well. I mean, some of the ideas that you have brought to the table and that we can do individually and collectively, I think will go a long way. And it's something has to be done, and the sooner that it is started, the better. And so any form of action that you decide to do, we as are within our own communities, even starting from our friends and families and colleagues, and we have to make everyone aware, and so that the campaign will gather pace, and hopefully that major action can be taken by the authorities that matter. And I know for a fact, I mean, Rohingya was mentioned. Obviously, China has a huge influence in Myanmar, what is going on there, what has been going on there. And I personally have visited the camps, one of the camps in Cox's Bazar, where many of the Rohingyas are living. And only yesterday, I'm sure everybody has seen the fire that engulfed one of the camps, Balakuli camp in Cox's Bazar. And this was inevitable. This was bound to happen. It was such a small area and being inhabited by so many people, and the conditions were absolutely atrocious. So not this, I mean, these are so many other the issues that as human beings we have to address, and we have to do our level best to try and eradicate from our society. So once again, thank you so much, and we will please keep us posted for any further actions that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasa Anami. For anybody that is not Bengali, Sasa means uncle. Sasa Ali Akbar, Sasa Anami. These are our respected elders from the community. So when we address them as my uncle. So thank you for that. I'm going to thank, first of all, everybody that's been a part of this event. Some people have dropped off, obviously, have had other commitments, and we wouldn't be without the audience. So thank you very much. Stephen, your input has been invaluable, and I mean, I'm really glad that we were put in touch. The way you set this up and the way that you give us insight from a UK and European political perspective, phenomenal. Thank you very much, and I will be reaching back out to you about the Rohingya event as well, because I think you'll be able to add value. And Arslan, where are you gone on my screen? Brother Arslan, I reached. There you are. We were introduced by a third party, and I'm so pleased to have met you. Your talk was just like, it was gut-wrenching. It was just really horrific, but you did it with so much dignity that you gave the victims. And so, may God bless you for this. And thank you for shedding light on this. And we'll stay in touch, and we'll continue working with each other. But I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know it's late over there in Bahrain. What time is it, by the way? I think it should be about 9 o'clock or 9:30. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not too late. 9:30. I've done, I do interviews, quite late sometimes, but yeah, it's not too late. 9:30.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you very much for your humble support with this event, and we will be in touch. And everybody else, I hope you've taken something from it. I hope that you've learned from it. I hope that you can work on, getting the message out at the very least, and boycotting what you can and supporting however you can. If you would like to follow up in any capacity, please do so with me. I'll put you in touch with the speakers, other people in the group. Katie, Abby, I will be back in touch with yourself to speak about this. And Sasa Ali Akbar, I'll be back in touch with you to reach out about the Rohingya speakers. And thank you very much, everybody. And that's us calling it a night for the evening. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.